help them have an early retirement. And I think that would make a big difference. The other thing about all, you recognize that there are 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies. I mean, can you imagine that? That is absurd, and they all have budgets, and they all have fat. And one of the things that I would do is evaluate all of them in terms of their cost versus their benefit. I would also ask every leader of each one of those agencies and sub-agencies to cut their budget by 2 to 3%. And if they can't do that, to hand in their resignation. And I would tell them to do it in such a way that the American people could not tell that they had done it. Very different than what was done a few years ago with the sequestration, when they were given the instruction, cut in the places where people will feel it the most so that no one will be asking for a budget cut in the future. Those are the kinds of things that I think we can very easily do. And those are the kinds of people that we want. And you know, the left has been critical of me because they've said that I want to spy on everybody. I don't necessarily want to spy on everybody, but I do believe in the concept of secret shoppers. And there's no reason that we can't have them in the government also, and looking to see what people are doing. And you know, if you have a bunch of bureaucrats who are just stonewalling people and not taking care of them, and we are paying them out of our pockets, they don't need to be there as far as I'm concerned.
Dr. Carson, you were dancing around the next question I was going to ask, and I'd like to elaborate a little bit because you were going exactly the direction I was hoping you would. The next area of inquiry that we're going to talk about is energy and the EPA, and you refer to it as you said the definition of the EPA, what it stands for. There's actually another acronym. I call it the Eliminate Prosperity Agency because it crushes small business and large alike with the crippling regulations that come through the regulators who don't answer to anybody because they're so entrenched. There was a recent regulation by way of Exempt 2. One is the Clean Power Plan. The way it was passed, it was done through regulatory fiat. The other one, anyone ever hear of WOTUS? Does that sound familiar, like POTUS, but with the W? Waters of the U.S.? They redefined what was a navigable waterway, like the Mississippi River or something like that. A WOTUS is water of the U.S. could be a ditch running through your backyard or your business or your house that is intermittently filled with water when it rains. That could fall into the definition of waters of the U.S., which means they could what? Regulate it. And basically by regulating it, they're preventing you from using your private property the way you want to without a federal permit. I renamed it LOTUS, Lands of the U.S., because it's a land grab is what it is. But you believe, what I'm hearing is that you can balance the need to have a livable and protect a livable environment with the reality of the cost of regulations for small business. You believe that? How would you balance that?
I mean, I think if we handle it with logic and common sense,
okay.
That's it, rather than with ideology. The President's Clean Power Plan. You know, the EPA has said if we implement every aspect of it, it will lower the Earth's temperature by 0.05 degrees Fahrenheit in 85 years. That's the benefit. What's the cost? Billions of dollars and millions of jobs. Makes absolutely no sense because it is done on the basis of ideology and not on the basis of evidence. And if we look at every one of these agencies as well as the regulations on the basis of cost versus benefit, then I think we can begin to trim them down in an appropriate way. One of the interesting things is last year, 81,000 pages of new regulatory burdens were added to us. 81,000. Cost of compliance, all these things, almost $2 trillion. You want to break that down for a family of four? $24,000 per family of four. That also happens to be the level of poverty for a family of four, $24,000. So if you really want to eliminate poverty, let's get rid of all these regulations. I think that would make a lot more sense. Something I think we need to be looking at. back to the whole energy issue. God has blessed this country with enormous energy. And, we ought to be a net energy exporter now. Fracking, really was a boon for us. Now, the price has come down so low, it's under $30 a barrel now. But you know what? Necessity is the mother of invention. And we will come up with even better, more effective ways of fracking, which is actually very good, because what that will do is keep the price low, which is very good for our economy, but also very good to keep Putin under control. Because see, he's a one-horse show, energy, oil. And if we keep the price low, it really depresses him. And look at all of the natural gas that we have. We have hundreds of years worth of it. We now have the ability to liquefy it and to transport it overseas. We can sell it to Europe for much less than they're getting it for now. Undercut him, put him back in his little box where he belongs. Those are the kinds of proactive energy policies that I think will be helping us out a great deal. And also, some of the profits that we derive from our petroleum products can be used to stimulate research into other areas. For instance, we sit between two oceans. 70 to 80% of our population live bi-coastally. What if we began to develop the hydroelectric energy from the ocean? Can you imagine what that would do for us? We are perfectly situated to do it. And then there's a whole host of other kinds of things that we can do. So the other thing that I don't believe in is government subsidies for all of these various things. I think things should rise and fall on their own merits. We've gotten too involved in everything that's going on. Now, we have made certain agreements with certain parts of the energy sector, and people have, invested a lot, and, all of those things will disappear by 2022, and I think we really should start phasing out everything that we can where the government is interfering with private industry.
Dr. Carson, I've been involved in two major lawsuits fighting the constitutionality of Obamacare. It was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court 5-4, which harkens back to our very first question. But my question is, I challenged Obamacare not because of what I believe people maintained that it was intended to do. I challenged it based on the fact that they were doing it the wrong way. There's a better way to provide people with access to health insurance without doing it in an unconstitutional manner. My question to you is, Obamacare repeal and replace, and if so, with what?
Okay. Well, everybody knows that I'm a vociferous opponent of Obamacare. Not because it doesn't work, not because it's not affordable, not because it's a travesty upon the human race, but the real reason is because this country was designed of, for, and by the people. And the government was supposed to be there specifically for the purpose of facilitating life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for the people. With Obamacare, along comes the government and says, we don't care what you, the people, think. We're shoving this down your throat, and if you don't like it, too bad. That completely alters the way that our country was set up. The people were supposed to be at the pinnacle. The government, the next step down. That flip-flopped it, puts the government at the pinnacle, dictating to the people. And if we accept that, we will accept anything, which is why we must reject it and restore America to the original intention. The other thing to keep in mind, it is definitely not affordable unless you're very poor. It is a mechanism for redistributing wealth in our country, and the cost has gone down slightly. I will admit that, but the reason is because a lot of people aren't going to seek medical care because they don't want to pay that $6,000 deductible. They don't have that $6,000 deductible to pay, so they allow their health to deteriorate, and the government is claiming victory because of that. That is absolutely absurd. So what I've suggested that we replace it with is a system that puts the care back in the hands of patients and their healthcare providers using health empowerment accounts, which is very similar to a health savings account except with no bureaucrats involved. So you get to decide yourself. You get to decide yourself how you're going to use your money for healthcare purposes. We pay for it with the same dollars that we pay for traditional healthcare with. We spend twice as much per capita in this country as many other nations, and yet we have these horrible access problems. People will get an HEA from the day of birth until the time that they die, at which time they can pass it on. And you give people the ability to shift money within their HEA. So if dad is $500 short for a procedure, mom can give it to him out of hers, or son, or cousin, or uncle, or anybody in the family. It makes every family essentially their own insurance company with no middleman. Gives you enormous flexibility. It also makes you care about each other. You know, if Uncle Joe is smoking like a chimney, everybody's going to hide his cigarettes. And then think about also the cost of your catastrophic insurance is going to drop dramatically at that point, because the only thing coming out of your catastrophic policy is real catastrophic incidents. How often do they occur? Not very often. So it's like a homeowner's policy with a big deductible versus a homeowner's policy where you want every single scratch covered. One costs $10,000 a year, one costs $1,500 a year. Same principle. And you allow it to be bought across state lines, which drives the price down even further. That works for 75% of the population extremely well. And it brings the whole healthcare system into the free market economic model, which controls pricing and quality, just like it does in every other aspect of our lives. But for the indigent, how are we going to take care of them? Well, we take care of them now with Medicaid. The annual Medicaid budget is $500 billion a year. We have almost 80 million people participating, which is way too many. And that number will go down as we fix the economy, believe me. But we'll still with it where it is. Divided out, it's more than $5,000 per each man, woman, and child on Medicaid. Well, what could you buy with that? A concierge practice, the boutique practice that rich people buy. The average costs $2,000 to $3,000 a year, and you still have thousands left over to buy your catastrophic insurance, which is much cheaper now. And we give people a menu, very much like you have in Medicare Part C, MediChoice. And all of those choices will include catastrophic care and a drug plan. And that way, people who are indigent will be just as valuable as everybody else. There will not be a two-tiered system. People will not even know the difference. And it also gets people thinking about ownership. Because with this plan, monies that you don't use just continue to roll over. And we've had it evaluated by some economic analysts. They said the average person who started their HEA at birth would have over $100,000 in it at the time that they die to pass on to their families. And think what happens over the course of a few generations with that kind of money being passed along. And that's what we should be doing. We should be designing programs that get people off of government assistance rather than putting them further onto it.
You know, if this thing for president doesn't work out, you should really consider a career in the healthcare profession. You talk like you've been around it. That's amazing. It's wow. One quick anecdotal story. Today, I was talking to a guy who was having a conversation with one of his more liberal friends who he attends church with. And when they were in church the other day, his friend said how excited he was. We got ObamaCare here to stay. It's not going anywhere. He goes, I just got a plan. Now I finally have health insurance. And my friend said, well, tell me about this policy. How much does it cost? He says, about $700 to $800 a month. He goes, what's the deductible? He said $3,000. $800 a month with a $3,000 deductible. I would rather that $700 to $800 a month be going into a health savings account or some other free market device. Moving along, I just thought that was an interesting anecdote.
The guy doesn't really realize until something happens that he doesn't have what he thought he had.
And he's been told, hey, you have insurance now. We've delivered. You've got insurance. Well, he does have insurance for $700 a month, and he can't use it unless he has something catastrophic happen to him. I want to shift from healthcare to the financial industry because there's another 2,000 plus page bill that was passed, just like ObamaCare, It's called Dodd Frank. Anyone ever heard of this? Dodd Frank is to the financial industry what Obamacare was to the healthcare industry. It's a large bill that was passed in the wake of a financial disaster when everyone was freaking out, and it basically centralizes power in the financial industry in the hands of unelected bureaucrats living and residing in Washington, D.C. So it is enshrined too big to fail on Wall Street and made it impossible or very difficult for small community banks on Main Street to get capital to many people because the cost of regulatory compliance is so high, they can't afford to capitalize to get money in the hands of farmers or students or young couples buying their first home. So my question is kind of a broad question, but as president, Dr. Carson, what would you do to scale back Dodd-Frank, and what would you do to help with these lines of credit to people, real folks on Main Street, USA?
Well, interestingly enough, regulation is not something that I'm totally against, but the appropriate kind of regulation. After the crash in 1929 and the years that ensued, they came up with Glass-Steagall. Because, they finally recognized that men are not angels. And neither are women, for that matter. But you have to have some kind of regulation to keep them from playing fast and loose with people's hard-earned money. And, somehow in the 90s, they became convinced that men were angels. So we began to do away with that kind of regulatory reform. And of course, problems started up again. It took about 20 years for the crisis to occur. But it is always going to occur if you don't have appropriate regulation. But with Dodd-Frank, we overreacted drastically. And, I can remember many afternoons sitting around the boardroom table at Kellogg, where I spent 18 years, Costco 16 years, talking about the implications of Dodd-Frank, how many lawyers we have to hire, how many new departments we have to set up. All of that stuff costs money. Guess who gets to pay for it? You do, absolutely. Every single regulation, gets passed on in terms of goods and services, and it's the most regressive form of taxation. Because when you go into the store to buy a box of detergent and it's gone up 25 cents, who does that hurt? It doesn't hurt the rich person. They don't even notice it. But the poor person notices that right away. The middle class person may not notice it right away, but they notice it by the time they get to the cash register, and everything in that cart has gone up a little bit, and they don't have that same sense of well-being. And you will get your Bernie Sanders of the world, and your Hillary Clintons, telling you the reason you don't feel good is because of those evil rich people. No, it's because of the evil government, which is encircling every aspect of your lives with all these regulations. That's the problem. So, again, we need to go back to evidence-based decision-making when it comes to the kinds of regulations we need. We do need regulations. I will not deny that. We need to make sure that people don't take advantage of everybody. But it's far fewer than what we're doing right now. We've just gone overboard with it.
Dr. Carson, you have, one of the very first issues I dealt with as Attorney General, and this is not something that I ever dreamed of running on, it was just an issue that landed in my lap. A very small mom and pop startup plane manufacturer tried to move here a couple years ago called Boeing. The National Labor Relations Board challenged, and let me rephrase that, they weren't moving here. They were somewhere else. They were wanting to expand here while staying in the Union State. They wanted to expand here because they liked what South Carolina had to offer. There was a challenge from the NLRB about the legality of that private free market business decision to expand to another state. That really concerned me, and it actually kind of scared me that you can have a law that basically tells someone who owns a private business that you can't move unless the union's blessing. What I would like to know, and this is a very pro-right-to-work state, in fact, it's the second least unionized state in the country. If people want to be in a union, they have a God-given right to join a union, but they shouldn't be compelled to be in a union in order to have a job to begin with. What is your view, Dr. Carson, on the role of the National Labor Relations Board and right-to-work?
Well, everybody has a right to work, and no one should ever be forced into a union. It makes absolutely no sense. And particularly government workers. Why are there government unions? It makes no sense, because we the people are their employer. They don't get to have a union. That's ridiculous. And that needs to be fixed. But I just want to take an opportunity to say, I get the chance to visit a lot of states. You guys have a terrific Attorney General. The way he explains things, and I mean, people just don't take the time to do that. I think it's really, really wonderful. I appreciate the fact. It gives me faith again, because, when I got into this process, I really didn't think things were as bad as I found out. Because, there are so few people who are decent and honest and are there for you, for we the people. And it really is kind of discouraging that the American people no longer trust their government. And we have got to find a way to get decent, honest people in and start doing things the right way. There is right and wrong in this country. We need to reestablish that. I think that will take care of almost every question that's been asked.
I'm actually just taking your cue. You're really good at explaining things in a way that regular people can understand, so I'm trying to keep up with you, Dr. Carson. The next question is regarding the Second Amendment, and it's important. I joked the other day that I wasn't one of those people President Obama talked about 5 years ago, that wants to cling to their God and their guns. Y'all remember that comment? I'm one of him. I don't know what you are, but I am. There are a lot of people out there, some who are deranged, some are mentally ill and need help, others are just evil. And they do horrible, horrible, evil things, whether it's walking through a high school or a university or an elementary school or daycare. And they do horrible things with firearms. I remember reading once that Columbine involved a deranged person who violated 80 laws already on the books in order to commit those crimes. That it seems to be every time that there's a deranged person or a mentally ill person who does something, it becomes a gun issue, not a mental health issue. And the knee-jerk reaction is to do what? Pass more laws on top of the laws that were already violated to begin with. So my question is that I think there needs to be more of a focus on mental health. But as it relates to the Second Amendment and God-fearing people who are law-abiding citizens who want the right to own a firearm and follow the law, what are your views of the Second Amendment in relation to what I just said?
Well, obviously the Second Amendment is very, very important. It is there for a couple of reasons. First of all, so that the people can aid the military if we're ever invaded. It used to seem like that was unlikely, but it's not as unlikely now because of our feckless policies. But the more important reason is so that the people could defend themselves against our own government if it ever got out of control. And that is a real possibility, and we need to make sure that we never relinquish that right, because we've been free for hundreds of years. We've been free for hundreds of years because we've been armed for hundreds of years. And also, after the San Bernardino incident and after what happened in Paris, what's the president's first knee-jerk reaction? We need to take the guns away from the people. Just the opposite. We've got jihadists over here, and they want to kill us, and we're going to take the guns from the law-abiding people? That makes absolutely no sense. And these deranged people that we were just talking about, they're not so deranged that they don't know that you should go to a gun-free zone to commit their atrocities. It seems like they all seem to know that. And have you ever noticed that Israel sits right in the midst of all kinds of people who want to do them harm? And have you noticed that there's none of those school shootings in Israel? Ever stop to think why that is? It is because they have trained people in those schools, highly trained people in those schools, and nobody knows who they are. And they have access to weapons, and they know how to use them, and the terrorists know that. So that's not a place where they're going to go. I think that may be something we can learn from that kind of thing. But the other thing is, some people say, yeah, but you don't need to have an automatic weapon or a semi-automatic weapon. Well, when the Second Amendment was put into place, the government had muskets and the people had muskets. Enough said.
So the next question is really two questions, two parts. One is a really quick one, and I'll just go to it first. I was one of 3 attorneys general representing one of 3 states that were being looked at transporting the detainees at Guantanamo Bay to the continental United States, us, Colorado, and Kansas, to a naval brig in Charleston, South Carolina. Obviously, I told the president not to do this. I know that other federal members of our federal delegation are fighting this as well. What is your position on moving the detainees from Gitmo? That's part A.
Well, I think it's craziness. We have a
That was in my letter, too, to the president's craziness. You're crazy.
We have a perfectly good situation that exists. Once you start bringing them here, all kinds of legal complications occur, different kinds of rights that have to be provided, not to mention the possibilities of escape. Why would we even be thinking about something like that? And, the other thing to keep in mind, these are very, very dangerous people that we're talking about. The fact that the president is releasing these people and they're going back into war and they're going to hurt our country and hurt our people, why would anybody do that? I sometimes have a hard time even understanding why he does the things that he does, without thinking about it. And the other thing I just want to mention along the same lines is, it's not that we're prejudiced against any group of people, but, what Islam represents is not just a religion. It is a way of life that does not allow for the separation of church and state. And, if you believe all the components of it, including Sharia, it really isn't compatible with the way that we do things in this country. So I really believe in the Teddy Roosevelt philosophy. In the early 1900s, he said, we're a land of immigrants. And as such, anybody is welcome in our country from any country, race, or religion if they want to be Americans, if they accept our values and principles. If they don't, they should stay where they are.
I think you touched on this, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways. Terrorism. I look around the room, I see a young man here on the front row, I see a young girl out there in a green sweater. My 2 children were in the back of the room earlier. There was a young girl over here. We had a beautiful little girl up here earlier. I think of young people when I think of terrorism because the terrorists are attacking their future, and that concerns me as a parent. You talked about this in addressing the Syrian refugee crisis, but how would you handle the growing ISIS issue around the country, the terrorism cells that are multiplying and basically proliferating around the world? How would you as president handle that for our future?
Well, they are here already. Lots of terrorist cells have invaded our country. And, the sheriffs at the border were telling me about the OTMs other than Mexicans who were coming in here from Northern Africa and the Middle East freely. So it's problematic. So first of all, seal the border, like I said. I think the other thing we can do in this country is we can teach the American people what to do if they're in a situation where terrorists are attacking. Just like when I was a kid, they used to have air raid drills. And when the siren went off, you knew where you were supposed to go and what you were supposed to do. We need to start teaching our people what needs to be done. We also need to follow their internet communications, see where they lead. We need to put out our own communications because they're going after the disaffected members of society. We can go after those same people, but also we ought to engage in offensive cyber warfare. We ought to destroy their ability to use the internet. We ought to destroy their servers. Some people say that's a dirty pool, but they're dirty people. We can use dirty pools. Also, we need to be working with the imams and the clerics, and we need to be telling them that they have to become a part of identifying the radicalized people. They have to help us identify them. And if they're not willing to do that, or they can't do that, then they must understand that we are going to have to treat them differently, because we cannot afford to let ourselves be destroyed because we're so silly trying to be politically correct in everything we do.
I just got the 5-minute warning. So I got 2 more questions, and I'm going to give you the last word, Dr. Carson, because they're here to see you. The first question, I want to preface it, as I look around the room, I see a lot of men and women in uniform. Some who are not wearing uniform because they're plain clothes. And there are probably people in the audience who are law enforcement, or retired law enforcement, or related to someone in law enforcement. And first, I would like to just give a quick round of applause to the law enforcement men and women. And that goes, we have security here in this building, and it's they're unsung heroes. They're not paid a lot of money, and they put their lives on the line every single day, and you rarely hear them. The only time you hear anything about law enforcement is when there's one outlier, one bad actor who does something horrible. We've obviously, the North Charleston shooting resonates with many of us because it happened in our backyard. But I believe that the president is kind of the chief cheerleader for the tone in this country. You know, many in the minority community felt like that law enforcement, that there's a detachment with law enforcement because of those types of incidents. But I think the president, regardless of what community you hail from, can play a vital role in holding up law enforcement and basically closing that rift or that divide. As President of the United States, what do you think you could do to increase public confidence in our men and women in uniform in law enforcement ranks?
Well, I think, first of all, you certainly don't exacerbate the situation by pointing to law enforcement and saying that they're the problem. Are there bad apples in law enforcement? Yes. There are bad apples in everything. There are bad apples in medicine, in business, in journalism. I'm out there. All kinds.
Not these folks in the back. Y'all are good. We like you.
But do we try to go out and kill the whole group because there are a few bad ones? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Now, let me just take this opportunity to say that, you know, the shooting with the Bad Apple policeman here in South Carolina was handled beautifully. You know, the law enforcement, the government officials, the people, you know, they all condemned it immediately. Swift action was taken. That was correct. And also, you know, with the church shooting, you know, I had a chance to visit that church. That was genuine. Those people were real Christians. You know, the way that they were able to forgive. That says a lot about the people in this state. I think that's wonderful. But clearly, you know, when it comes to our people who are putting their lives on the line every single day, the president needs to be the most grateful person for that, because we would have total chaos if they were not there. And one of the things that we ought to be thinking about is, you know, how do we introduce law enforcement into some of the troubled neighborhoods early and often, so that people actually know them. I was in Baltimore this summer. I was talking to a police officer, and he said he makes it his job to go to a certain neighborhood every day, and he walks through the neighborhood. Everybody knows him there. He says he never has to buy lunch. They're always saying, "Come on in, you know, have a sandwich." You know, he says it's wonderful. But you know, it's relationships. That's really what and what we have to do is we have to create the relationships between the police department and the communities. And it's mutual respect. People have to respect the police police have to respect the people. I think that will make all the difference in the world. And also, as a society, you know, we have to add some sensitivity. For instance, you know, a minimum wage job worker, he gets a moving violation. Those are very expensive, you know, like $170. He can't afford to pay it. So what happens? You know, he ignores it. Next thing you know, he's got an arrest warrant. He loses his job. It's a downhill spiral. When all we had to do was provide a mechanism so he could pay it off at $5 a week. So we need to be looking at those kinds of things that we can do so that we can make everything easier for everybody in our society. It'll make the big difference.
Okay. Dr. Carson, we're down to our last question, and I'm going to allow you to use your answer to this last question as your opportunity to close it out. But before I do, I want to give a few quick housekeeping matters, because I want him to be able to speak last. Y'all can applaud for him. First off, I want to thank the Brookland Baptist community, the church, the conference center. I see Pastor Jackson and and all the folks, the staff here who supported this event. Thank you so much. I want to thank the Conservative Leadership Project, Brielle, and the folks at the CLP. Understanding that after this, there's going to be an opportunity for all of our college, high school interns, anyone's volunteering to get their photo with Dr. Carson. So back hallway, Brielle will direct you. So if you're a CLP volunteer or you supported this event, go to back. We're going to do a quick last moment photo with Dr. Carson. And last, a shameless self-promotion. First, my handle is up there, at A.G. Allen Wilson. So if you're inclined to do the Twitter, social media thing, and you want to know what I'm up to, what our office is doing, if you want to criticize us, that seems to be the favorite place to go now. There's my handle up there, and then Dr. Carson's Twitter handle, at Real Ben Carson, is back there on that banner. So if you do social media or Facebook, please visit. CLPforums.com is the website if you want to know more about the Conservative Leadership Project and see some of the things it's doing and trying to educate the public. Please visit that website and become more informed about this organization. Again, I thanked everyone, but I haven't thanked all of you for taking time on a holiday to come out here and to meet a presidential candidate and a great man, Dr. Carson. And I want to thank all of you. You should pat yourselves on the back for being here. Now, last question. And it's going to be audience participation, because this is really important to me. It deals with the military and veterans. And I look around the room, we've acknowledged our law enforcement, men and women in law enforcement, our first responders, no different. But I'd like to call out military. If you are a veteran or a current member of the military, or you are married to a member of the military, or you have a child or a parent in the military, or there's someone in the military that you care about, related or otherwise, stand up. Or raise your hand if you're already standing. All right, let's applaud for the military, ladies and gentlemen. You can sit down. The reason I did that, Dr. Carson, is this question is about the military and about veterans. Obviously, I wanted you to know who the audience you were speaking to, and I wanted to recognize the men and women. As a 19-year veteran myself, this is very important to me. South Carolina is fortunate to have strong ties to our armed forces. On behalf of South Carolina's military families, what efforts would you take to assist our military men and women and the veterans alike?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say how wonderful it's been here being with you all. And I also want to introduce you to my wonderful wife, Candy. Who is You know, we have a 14% decrease in the number of people applying for our voluntary military. That is a serious problem, and that number seems to be getting worse. We also only can accept 29% of people who apply for the voluntary military because the other 71% cannot make the grade, either for physical conditions, mental conditions, or educational lacking. The last one being the most severe. So we got some real work to do in this country that's going to affect our security into the future. Now, you know, having a military right now that is at its smallest level relatively speaking, ever. That the Navy since 1917 hasn't been this small. The Air Force since 1940. Sequestration has cut the heart out of our personnel. Many of our top generals have retired. And our veterans, you know, we have 22 veterans committing suicide every single day. And that's the tip of the iceberg. We obviously are not providing them with the right kind of care. So what I would suggest is that when a person enlists, they also are assigned a support group, which is with them throughout their entire military career, particularly when they're in combat, continues with them after their discharge for a number of years, and starts working on their reintegration into society a year before their discharge, so that they quit on Friday and they start their new job on Monday. I would also make sure that they all have health empowerment accounts that are subsidized by the government. They can go to any healthcare facility in the country to get taken care of. And we should be honored to take care of them. And if they want to go to a veterans facility, they certainly can, but they don't have to. I would like to use the veterans facilities for doing research, particularly into traumatic brain injury, into post-traumatic stress disorder, limb replacement, and a lot of the things that are very relevant to our veterans. Because we must recognize that since the inception of this country, approximately every 15 to 20 years, we've been involved in some kind of conflict. And if it were not for our veterans, we would not be free, so that we must absolutely take care of them. And let me just close by saying, you know, I trust the wisdom of the American people. I also hope that the people understand that where we are right now is very serious. We're at the precipice. We're about to go over the precipice. If we go over it, I do not think that we will be able to return. This is an extraordinarily important election that is coming up. Please pray to God for wisdom to make the right choice. We cannot continue to go down the same road that we have been down many times before, with the pundits and the media manipulating and telling us what we have to do. This is one time when the American people must absolutely think for themselves. And if we do that, and we ask God for wisdom, the right thing will happen. Thank you very much.